Now, Red Rock controls 3 licenses in the Katanga segment of the Central African Copper Belt, which is highly prospective for copper and cobalt. The licenses are located in a world-class copper-cobalt postcode with an estimated 400,000 tonnes of copper and 25,000 tonnes of cobalt in the license area. Now, Andrew, we've all heard about the multitude of problems in recent years with the DRC, what with child labour and political turmoil. So what is the DRC like to do business in now, and how stable is the current political situation there?
Now, to tell the truth, I don't think child labour is an issue. There may have been a time during the Civil War and in times of civil unrest when tenements, even ones with a lot of known resource in them, were being neglected by their owners, and therefore, because nature abhors a vacuum, people were going in and in a fairly organized way picking up copper and cobalt and putting them in bags and selling them to Chinese middlemen who just bought the bags, didn't care who they bought it from. Now, at the point when that was most organized, there may have been some element of compulsion in the use of child labor. I certainly haven't seen that. Of course, I came along later, and what I did see was that some areas which were already most areas when I started going there were in the hands of big companies who, of course, fence it in, start to produce properly, whether that's Chinese companies or whether it's Western companies. And so the great bulk of the copper and cobalt being produced, the cobalt in particular, is being produced quite clearly by big companies. But there were some areas which were still comparatively neglected and where people were producing cobalt. And the customers were there. There were Chinese middlemen who were sitting there, and they were, particularly when the cobalt price was high 2 or 3 years ago, that kept them there. And they were buying sacks of material with cobalt from people and then shipping it directly off to China or whatever they were doing with it. And at that stage, I can tell you what was actually happening is you would get a caretaker or someone, or a guard in an area, and the local people would come to him, and girls, for example, at 15 or 16, would go and they would pay him a bit of money, or they'd get the right to go and spend 2 or 3 hours a day collecting material, and they'd give it to him, and they'd be paid something, and he would sell it on for a bit more, and they'd be able to go and buy nice silk clothes, and they would be able to pay for their education. And what would you rather that they did? Prostitution in areas with very little money. Some people were actually paying for their education that way, and they were eager to get the chance to do a little bit of part-time work. So what I saw was not exploitative at all. And since then, of course, with the cobalt price going down, I think those traders who were buying the sacks of material a lot of them have disappeared. And so overwhelmingly now, you can say that what is being produced properly in normal industrial way, as you'd expect. So that idea of child labor is, first of all, terribly out of date. And secondly, it's a spectrum. You cannot just think of it as being one phenomenon. It's a number. The political turmoil, that has gone too, and the Civil War, that's gone. One accomplishment of the last president is he did actually build up the armed forces and create a stable hierarchy and get them on the whole paid, so that there isn't the vacuum which allowed neighboring countries after the resources to come in and foment problems and create in some outlying areas of the companies some sort of warlordism. That's all gone. In fact, you only need to look at the expansion in secondary education in the last 20 years in the Congo to see things have changed quite dramatically. So, hospitals, schools, women's education, all these things have improved immeasurably. And I would say that Katanga is, on the whole, quite a well-run place. That's in the east, just above Zambia. And that's where, historically, all the mineral resources came from. If you take, for example, Gécamines, the state mining company, they have beautifully preserved core in core trays in their sheds, dating back as far as the 1930s. You can actually go and see a hole drilled then, and you can go and you can analyze this. And where else in the world have things been so well kept? Where are the best metallurgists for copper and cobalt in the world? Probably a lot of them are working for Gécamines. So the standards have been kept up through civil war, through Mobutu, through everything, even though the company itself was looted. So there's a lot to be working with there, in that the standard of professional education is pretty high. There's also been an issue with the law, in that a few years ago there was really only military courts, there wasn't a civil code. That's changed enormously too. The law actually works, and we know because we've had to use it to enforce our contract with our partners there. And if you've got the law on your side and you're quietly persistent, you can win. But the law works, the place is peaceful, and there are a lot of good companies there.
Okay. And what is the mining infrastructure like in the DRC, in particular the area of your licenses?
It's very good. The governors of Katanga, the last couple of governors of Katanga have actually been good. They've made sure that they invested in upgrading and maintaining the main road running from Lubumbashi to Kolwezi in the Copper Belt. They do their best to keep that going, because that's the artery through which a lot of the company's wealth flows. And of course, you've got all the services present in the DRC. Sometimes if you want something like geophysics, if you want to get SkyTem, for example, to bring in a helicopter to do MAG and EM, you'll have a little bit of trouble paying for licenses, getting people in. But generally speaking, the mining infrastructure is quite excellent, and you can find good people to do everything if you look.
Okay. And who are the neighbours? And are there any majors in close proximity?
Well, we have a couple of joint ventures. One, of course, is the one you're referring to with Gécamines, where what was kind of assured to us is that we would be able to get 400,000 tons of copper and 25,000 tons of cobalt in the license. Now, of the three areas we have under joint venture, one of them is pretty much advanced, and we have a target there by looking at the 90 plus holes drilled historically, looking at what was at the lower cutoff you used today and what was in the sulfide below the oxide that they were concentrating on, and has not been extracted but was drilled through. And we reckon something like 170, 180,000 tons of copper at 2.7% or so, about 17,000 tons of cobalt at 0.7 or so. This is the target. This is what we want to show we have there before we even drill. So we have one particular area where there's an old pit that was exploited a long time ago, wasn't exploited very deep, only in the oxides, very high cutoff, and we can already estimate what we should be looking for below that by creating a 3D model of based on the old drilling results and core. So that we can validate, and we'd like to bring that up to a resource. And of course, we'd like to do more exploration there. So this is one of our two joint ventures. That's an area very near Kolwezi itself. We have another small joint venture, which is earlier stage exploration. And indeed, two of the assets in the main joint venture are more of the exploration stage. They're exceptionally good areas and highly prospective. Then we also are being offered an opportunity now to enter into a further joint venture, which would be right next to an existing and a long strike from an existing major copper producer, and that would be just north of Lubumbashi. And so I can't think of any company of anything like our size that has had this kind of success in getting a a substantial footprint in the Congo.
What is the scale of opportunity? And indeed, can you explain what it would take to turn the 400,000 tonnes of copper and 25,000 tonnes of cobalt into a JORC-compliant resource?
Well, that's what we've been told will be in the joint venture area as a minimum. And of course, we're told by quite qualified people, but who've a lifetime of experience there in our local partners. But in terms of what we can see our way to bringing up to JORC compliant standard, we would hope to be able to bring to JORC a target of about 170,000 tonnes of copper and 17,000 tonnes of cobalt, as I say. And that would not, we think, be too difficult. But that would be the starting point, because that would be based on the old work that's done, the old drilling, and sort of building out a 3D model from those holes. And what would it take to bring it to JORC compliant is you try and get hold of some of the old core, retest it. You'd maybe twin one or two holes, and you look at the old core logs, and you get it from that. Clearly, because you've got mineralization more or less from surface, or if you open up the pit, you've got mineralization straight away. You could quite quickly start to add tons by doing more drilling. In the other two exploration areas, we would have to go through the normal exploration process. And that also applies to the other small joint venture we have. There's a new project that we're looking at and hoping to get. That would be more, again, in the sense of we would have actually oxides there, ready, available to put in with our next door neighbour. So we'd hope to bring that to JORC quite quickly.
And what is the roadmap for the joint venture going forward?
Well, that's an interesting one, because we have been very cautious about speaking about this so far. And the reasons, as in some African countries, when you do deals there, things are not just immediately like the red carpet laid out. Sometimes you have issues that you have to resolve. And we had that experience in Kenya. And of course, we solved it. In that case, we had to go to litigation. In Congo, we had a small internal problem in our joint venture partners, and that was a family conflict there, which had to be sorted. And then it reached a stage where the only thing I suspect that the people in that family and their lawyers thought were agreed upon was that maybe they could seize the main asset from us by pretending it had been lost. So we had to resolve these things, and we did so, and we have extremely good lawyer there. And it may be that today is actually the day when everything gets solved. Certainly we'd hope that this week will be the week when everything finally gets solved, because as soon as we have absolute clarity, we really want to get the joint venture statutes registered and regard that as key. And once we get that with the main joint venture and maybe sign the other thing, then we'll come out with announcements, and we will be very, very open and forthright about it. But we didn't really want to tell people how good what we have is and how optimistic we are about it, when there's even the slightest opportunity that water could start running uphill and files could start disappearing from where they were. We want to wait till everything is completely buttoned down. And we're really at that point, and we can start telling the story. Then we have to start building up the infrastructure to explore and bring into production. And that's going to require us to be a much bigger company. But I think when people know what we have there, we will be a much bigger company.
Thank you, Andrew Bell, the CEO of Red Rock Resources, telling us there a little bit more about